The frost crackled under his boots like tiny bones. Each step was a violation of the morning's silence, a sound too loud for the hollowed-out world he now walked in. The air was a blade, sharp and clean, scented with pine and the distant sweet rot of fallen leaves. And underneath it all, the smell he'd come to know so well these past few weeks, the honest scent of hay, of leather, of manure. The smell of a life that wasn't his in a place he never wanted to be. What do you do when the only thing left of someone you loved is a responsibility they left behind? A living, breathing, complicated responsibility with 4 legs and a heart you can't begin to understand. The stable was a cathedral of quiet shadows and dust motes dancing in the thin shafts of light, cutting through the cracked boards. His father's house, just 100 yards away, felt 1,000,000 miles from here. Empty. A museum of a life interrupted. Leo couldn't bear the silence in there. The ghost of his father's laugh still trapped in the curtains, his absence of physical weight in every room. So he came here, to the one thing his father had loved almost as much as he'd loved Leo. Almost, and there he was. In the last stall, the great gray dapple gelding stood like a statue carved from mist and memory. He didn't turn his head as Leo approached. He simply stood, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the weathered wood of his confinement. This was Silver, champion, heartbreaker, legacy. Now, just a piece of the estate to be settled, a trophy gathering dust. Leo leaned against the stall door, the wood cold and rough against his forehead. He was a man unraveled, a suit that didn't fit anymore, shoved into an old waxed jacket that smelled of his father. His grief was a quiet internal scream, a constant pressure behind his eyes. He was here to do a duty, to feed, to water, to muck out, a chore, a penance for being the one left behind. He slid the bolt open. The click was a gunshot in the quiet. The horse's ear twitched, a minute dismissive flick. That was all. No welcoming nicker, no soft nuzzle for a treat, just a profound, immense indifference. Leo could feel it. This animal wasn't just old. He was retired in his soul. He had been the star of the show, the arc of a perfect jump captured in 1,000 photographs, and now his world was this 12 by 12 box. He'd been put out to pasture, and the pasture was a stable waiting for a decision Leo didn't know how to make. He forked hay into the rack, the rustle of it, the only conversation. He filled the water bucket, the splash too loud. He moved carefully, aware of the immense power standing so still beside him. He could feel the animal's warmth, hear the steady, deep rhythm of his breathing. It was a sound that filled the space, a sound more real and more solid than anything Leo had felt in weeks. He picked out the hooves, a task his father had taught him as a boy, a lifetime ago. The gelding stood compliant, a well-mannered ghost. There was no fight in him, but there was no connection either. He was a mountain allowing a tiny creature to scurry at its base. When Leo straightened up, a brush in hand, he finally looked the horse in the eye. One dark liquid eye regarded him. There was no fear there, no curiosity, just a deep, unfathomable knowledge, a patience that felt ancient. This creature had known applause and adoration. He had known the thrum of a crowd and the pure, soaring joy of flight over a triple bar. And now he knew this. A stranger's hesitant touch. Leo began to brush long, slow strokes along the muscular neck. The gray coat, flecked with white, was softer than it looked. Dust and dried sweat lifted away. He brushed not for the horse, but for himself. For the mindless, rhythmic motion of it. For the feel of something alive and warm under his hand. His thoughts were a blur of funeral flowers and legal documents, of a will that stated simply, "And Leo will know what to do with Silver." He didn't. He absolutely didn't. His hand stilled. The pressure in his chest built, a wave of loneliness so acute it stole his breath. He closed his eyes, his forehead resting against the horse's shoulder, the coarse hair against his skin. He didn't cry. He was too tired for tears. He just stood there, leaning into the only living thing that seemed to understand the sheer weight of silence. And then, he felt it. A shift, a deep sigh that moved the great body. A turn of the massive head. Leo held his breath. He could feel the warm, soft whisper of the horse's breath against his neck. Then the faint, investigating touch of a velvet muzzle. It was a ghost of a touch, a question. It sniffed his collar, his hair, the salt scent of his skin. It was the first voluntary contact the animal had ever initiated. Leo didn't move, didn't dare breathe. The brush slipped from his fingers and thudded softly on the bedding. The horse didn't jerk away. He simply stood, his head now curved around Leo's body, his breath warming Leo's back. A living shield, a quiet vigil. It was not an act of excitement or joy. It was something deeper, an acknowledgement, a recognition of a shared loneliness. After a long moment, Leo finished his work. He gave the horse a fresh flake of hay. His movement slower now, less jagged. The gelding dipped his head and began to eat, the sound steady and grounding. Leo stepped out of the stall, latching the door behind him. He stood for a moment watching. The horse continued to eat, his world once again contained to the simple, present moment of hay and hunger. Leo turned to leave, to walk back to the empty house and all the ghosts it held. His boots echoed on the concrete aisle, and then the sound of eating stopped. He froze, glanced back. Silver had lifted his head. He was watching Leo, not with indifference but with a quiet, piercing attention. His ears were pricked forward, his gaze fixed. He took one step toward the door, then another. He stood at the threshold of his stall, his head over the door, watching the man walk away. He didn't call out. He didn't paw or fret. He just watched, as if he'd been left enough times to know the sound of a goodbye. And for a reason he could not begin to articulate, Leo felt the weight of that gaze like a hand on his shoulder, holding him there, asking him to stay. He didn't know this horse. This horse didn't know him. They were two strangers stranded on an island of shared loss. So why did it feel in that frozen moment like he was the one being abandoned? The days bled into weeks, a gray tapestry of routine. Leo's world had shrunk to the space between the empty house and the stable. He was a caretaker of ghosts. But something had shifted that day in the stall. The silence between man and horse was no longer just empty. It had texture. It had a pulse. Silver began to reveal himself in fragments in a language Leo was slowly learning to decipher. It was in the way the horse's ears would swivel forward just a fraction when Leo's truck crunched on the gravel drive. It was in the low, rumbling sigh he would give when Leo started brushing, a sound of pure, uncomplicated pleasure. But there were other things too, strange, subtle behaviors that felt like echoes. The word jump, spoken offhandedly into the silence as Leo fixed a loose board on the paddock fence, made Silver's head snap up from his grazing. His whole body went still, poised as if waiting for a command that never came. After a moment, the tension drained from him, replaced by something that looked, to Leo, unmistakably like disappointment. Then there was the old, faded cooler blanket, navy blue with a single white stripe, that Leo had found balled up in a corner. He'd shaken it out, sending dust motes swirling in the afternoon sun. Silver, from across the paddock, had let out a sharp, piercing whinny and trotted over, not stopping until he could bury his nose in the fabric, breathing deeply, his eyes half closed. It wasn't his blanket. It was his rider's, his father's. Leo found himself talking, not in the cheerful, empty way people talk to pets, but in a low, confessional murmur. He talked about the crushing weight of the empty house. He talked about the lawyer's calls, the pressure to sell, to liquidate, to move on. He talked about the guilt of being the son who'd chosen a life in a distant city, who'd only returned for holidays, who now realized every conversation with his father had been a missed opportunity. The horse would stand, a massive, silent witness, chewing his hay with a rhythmic, meditative cadence. Leo started to believe the animal wasn't just listening. He was understanding the grief, the shape of it, the weight. They were two abandoned creatures, one left by death, the other by the cruel expiration date of usefulness. The breaking point came on a rain-lashed afternoon. The wind howled around the stable, rattling the doors. Leo was in the tack room, a small, dusty sanctuary that still held his father's presence in the smell of old leather and saddle soap. He was looking for a stronger bit for the paddock gate latch. He pulled open a stiff drawer, jumbled with bits of metal and tools, and his hand brushed against something soft and papery. It was a manila envelope, gone yellow with age. On the front, in his father's firm, familiar script, was written, "For Leo, for when you're ready." His breath hitched. Ready for what? He sank onto an old trunk, his fingers trembling as he pulled out the contents. It wasn't legal documents. It was a stack of photographs, and a letter. The photos were of Silver. Not the glossy, professional show photos he'd seen in the house, but candid snaps. Silver as a gangly youngster, all legs and nervous energy. Silver with a ribbon pinned to his bridle, his neck arched proudly. His father standing beside him, beaming, looking younger than Leo had ever remembered him, and there at the bottom of the stack a photo of himself. He must have been 7 or 8, perched high on Silver's back, his father's strong hands holding him steady, his own small face alight with a mixture of terror and pure joy. He had forgotten that. He had forgotten it completely. The letter was short. Leo, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry. Sorry for any silence that was between us. It was never for lack of love. It was because the words were always here with him. Silver wasn't just a horse. He was my partner. He knew my heart better than anyone. When your mother died, it was this fellow who carried me through it. He never judged the tears I shed into his mane. He just stood, solid as a rock, and let me hold on. I'm not giving him to you as a burden. I'm giving him to you as the last piece of me. The best piece. He's old now. The world says he's used up. But you and I, we know better. Love isn't about what's useful. It's about what's true. Don't just be his keeper. Let him carry you too. The dam broke. A sob, raw and ragged, tore from Leo's throat. Then another. He crumpled over, the letter pressed to his chest, the photograph scattering on the floor. Weeks of held-back grief, of loneliness, of fear, came pouring out in a torrent he couldn't control. He cried for his father, for the lost time, for the overwhelming, impossible love in the words on that page. He was alone, utterly and completely alone in the small room. But he wasn't. From the stable, a sound cut through the roar of the storm and the sound of his own weeping. A loud, anxious nicker. Then another, followed by the solid thud of a hoof against a stall door. Leo didn't think. He stumbled to his feet, pushed the tack room door open, and walked down the short aisle. Silver was at his door, his head high, his ears pinned forward, his eyes wide with an intensity Leo had never seen. He was agitated. He was calling for him. Leo fumbled with the latch, stepped into the stall, and sank to his knees in the straw, his body still shaking with sobs. The great horse stood over him. He didn't nuzzle. He didn't ask for anything. He simply lowered his head, and Leo felt the warm, solid weight of the horse's jaw rest gently on the crown of his head. He could feel the animal's breath, steady and calm, stirring his hair. He could feel the immense, quiet strength of him. He was a shelter, a living, breathing monument to a love that had not ended. He stood that way, a silent, patient guardian, until the storm inside Leo passed, until the sobs subsided into shaky, even breaths. He stayed until the human was calm, just as he had done for the father. Weeks later, the first real sun of spring warmed the land. The paddock was turning green. Leo leaned against the fence, a coffee mug in his hand. It was a quiet morning, but the silence was different now. It was peaceful. Silver stood in the center of the field, his eyes closed, his face turned to the sun. He looked for the first time not old but wise, not discarded but content. Leo's gaze drifted to the far end of the paddock, where a single low log lay, half buried in the grass. It was nothing, a remnant from an old tree. As he watched, Silver's head came up. His ears pricked. He took a few steps toward the log, his gait loose and easy. Then, with a grace that seemed impossible for his age, he gathered himself. It was just a shadow of the movement, a memory of muscle. A collected canter, 2 strides, and a hop. A tiny, effortless levitation over the log, all 4 feet clearing the ground by inches. It wasn't a jump for a crowd. It wasn't for a ribbon. It was a jump for the sheer forgotten joy of it. For himself. For the memory of flight. He landed softly and carried on grazing as if nothing had happened. But Leo had seen it. And in that moment he understood the final gift. His father hadn't left him a problem to solve. He had left him a teacher. The world had called this horse trash past its prime, but it had taken a broken man and shown him how to be solid again. It had taken a grieving son and given him back a piece of his father. The love wasn't in the winning. It was in the carrying. It was in the quiet, steadfast presence long after the applause had faded. Sometimes, the ones who teach you how to carry on are the ones who were waiting for you to arrive. If this story found a place in your heart, then you know these moments of connection are rare and beautiful. We search for them everywhere. If you want to be here for the next story that just might change your heart, then do not let this feeling fade. Subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment below with just one word that describes what you're feeling. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And press the bell icon so you're here for our next journey, every single day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.